Okay, I have just found a new job here. And we are now going to have an interview with perhaps, certainly, Ridgewood's greatest and perhaps the nation's greatest expert on beekeeping. Today's episode is entitled, Everything You Wanted to Know About Bees, but was afraid to ask. And so we begin. Hello, Frank. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
First of all, you know, people know that I do a Zoom on Wednesday evening. I'm going to do a long interview with him because there's so much to ask about bees. But let's start with the idea of bees as being important to nature. Could you tell us a little bit?
Sure. So, 1 in every 3 bites of food that we eat is thanks to the honeybee. They pollinate so much of the food, so in addition to delicious honey, it's also apples, pears, oranges, almonds. Almonds is a $4.6 billion industry, 100% depends on the honeybees.
That's interesting. Are bee colonies intelligent?
So bees are the only invertebrate that can count to 4, and they've also discovered that they understand the concept of 0. So I would say that's a yes.
Bees can count to 4, and they also understand the concept of 0.
Yes.
Is there any way to translate that so that they don't bite you?
So bees don't bite. You will never get bit by a bee. I think you're thinking that they sting.
Sting, yes.
So honeybees are some of the most gentle of the stinging insects. So they only sting if their home is threatened or their life. And that's because if they sting, they die. So they try to do other things to scare you before having to go to the final step.
So in a colony, and I assume you have one bee colony.
I have 16.
16. Approximately how many bees are in each colony?
So think of a honeybee colony like a factory, and then depending on how much work is needed is how many bees are in the factory. So at the peak of when they're making honey, there can be up to 60,000 bees, and then in the winter, that shrinks and can go down to 12,000. I want to be clear that even though there's 60,000 bees in each of those boxes, not all 60,000 are leaving to go collect honey. So you're never going to see that many because there's so many jobs inside the hive that they're also doing.
Many times we equate bees with the summertime. What in fact do bees do in the winter?
So the whole reason that honeybees make honey is so their sisters who aren't even hatched yet have food to eat through the winter. So bees will spend their whole life making food for other bees that don't exist yet.
Wow. So how sterile, in fact, is raw honey?
So honey is is the only food that never spoils. And the reason that is because when the bees make the honey, they're taking sucrose, which is what nectar is, and breaking it into fructose and glucose. One of the byproducts of glucose is hydrogen peroxide. So because honey naturally has that, as well as some other properties, it's antimicrobial and antiviral. And so that's what I think you're referring to. So it kills stuff.
Interesting.
And it tastes great.
Finally, since bees have an understanding of arithmetic, are they intelligent enough to know that you are in fact their friend?
So honeybees can recognize faces. They have done studies on that. But just because they recognize me, they're not like a dog and they're not more friendly to me than they are to you. Bees, it's almost like they're a computer, and so they're constantly working on what they're focused on. It has nothing to do with me.
Would it be okay if I stepped in and asked you a few questions?
Please do.
My friend Frank is a bee nerd. And you know what? He wrote a book called... Where's it called, Frank?
Beef and the bugs they love.
So, why did you write this book?
So I love to talk to people and tell them about bees, and so through the years I've done over 100 talks like this, and then after about the 125th I said, "Man, how many times can I say the same thing? I keep hearing the same questions." I said, "You know what? I'm going to just take it all and put it into a book."
So the same question. Are you telling me that people, when they did math, hit on any of the same questions?
Yes.
Okay, what's the number one question that you get about bees?
So the number one question that I always is, why do bees make honey?
Okay, so I bet there's another question out there. Does anybody have a question for Frank about bees?
What Pokemon card you get?
Anybody?
What's the Pokemon?
You, right there in the front. Why do bees make honey? Guess what? Come on up and get yourself a nice jar of Frank's honey. Give her a good hand. Woo!
So the whole reason that honeybees make honey is so their sisters who don't exist yet would eat through the winter. And what's pretty exciting about it is how they spend the entire life to do that. And in this part of New Jersey, that a beehive needs anywhere between 80 and 100 pounds of honey to make it through the winter.
So that's pretty interesting. Hey, you know what? I heard that you really, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I heard you created quite a buzz when you moved into town, when you had all your hives, right? And I heard that your wife was just minding her own beeswax one Sunday. Is everybody following along? His wife was minding her own beeswax, and she came in with the New York Times, and she said, "Honey, look, you were given a review in the New York Times." Honestly, he's a very famous guy because his book was reviewed by the New York Times. How was that for you?
It was quite spectacular.
I can imagine.
So
I also want to point out that Frank has made Ridgewood New Jersey's first bee city. Tell us about that.
So a lot of people know about Tree City USA, which is to promote the benefit of trees. So now there's a new movement called Bee City USA to talk about pollinators and the importance of watching the environment and managing how much chemicals are put on properties. And so Ridgewood was the first in New Jersey and actually one of the first in the Northeast, which is fantastic because now all the other municipalities in our state are trying to catch up to us. And I love when we're number one.
Thank you for doing that for us. Give him a hand. It's a big deal. These are really important. I want everybody to go out and buy Frank's book. I also was very curious to learn that you started something called the Honey Cup. What is that?
So there's, believe it or not, in New Jersey and in this part of New Jersey, there's a bee club, the Northeast New Jersey Beekeepers, and there's over 200 beekeepers just in the Bergen County area. And so what we do is every year the different beekeepers can submit their honey for blind tasting, and if it was a normal time, everyone's always invited, and everybody who shows up gets a vote, and then they vote for the best tasting honey. And what's fantastic is that even though it's all relatively the same area, every honey tastes a little bit different. And that's because honey is completely dependent upon what flowers they go to for its color and taste. And every year we have a clear winner that wins the honey cup, which is the best tasting honey, as for everyone that comes.
That sounds great. So I understand that there are specific flowers that help bees make really delicious honey. And I understand that we have some seeds that are being distributed right now. So you want to tell us a little bit?
Yes, so that to help get the word out about my book, that there's some wildflower seeds that you can sprinkle onto the ground in the next spring, and that way you can have a nice garden that attracts bees. And it's interesting, to make 1 jar of honey, it takes 2 million flowers the bees have to visit. And to get to those 2 million flowers is over 56,000 combined flight miles, which is twice around the equator. And that's for only 1 pound. So the more flowers we plant, the better it is for the bees.
Great. I have one more question for you. Well, I got a couple more. Who is your favorite singer?
Who's my favorite singer? The Bee Gees?
Oh, I thought it was going to be Sting. Oh, anyway, so I want Frank to get another round of applause because we are so proud of the work that he's done, and he has been a wonderful representative for our community. Thanks, you guys. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.